back to another episode of Tapping into Tactics. We have two awesome guests today. Our first one, who was also on the last episode, Greg Reffner, the CEO and founder of Abstrakt. And then we have David Barron, who is actually the current global director of sales at Hubspot. Three main takeaways so that you know what to expect on today's episode. First one is we're talking about how sales teams are adapting after 10 years of abundance. So going back to the basics, focusing on training, coaching, hiring, being in the weeds. Second one, objection handling. We know this is a favorite, but we have to go beyond the status quo. Reps are now having to overcome 3 to 4 objections per call if they get an answer. So we need to take a step back and make sure that our team is prepared to have a business conversation, not just a cold call anymore. Last but not least, you knew this one was probably coming, but the future of AI in your sales tech stack, and how if you're not using AI, your competitors probably are going to beat you out, because if they jump on board, it gives that much of an advantage. So let's dive in and get you guys the good stuff.
Which is like 962 or something like that. Just imagine like 10 to 12 half-hour calls a day for 8 months. It was wild.
My record was like 54 logos in a year.
Well, you have to remember, I mean, that was at a time where I was selling like a pretty transactional product where we could do a discovery, demo, and close in 30 minutes. And it was also in 2014 when we realized, like, when someone signs up for the product, you can send them a link to the sales rep's calendar. And the day we figured that out, we went from having 3 or 4 meetings a day to like we were catering lunch and dinner in the office every day because we literally couldn't get up from our desks. I would say, looking back, it probably wasn't the most healthy thing, but I was pretty young, and that many calls to me meant overachieving on quota and variable commission. So it was totally fine with me. And it was like fun. It was fun.
And how much did that accelerate your learning curve? Like, so much just experience condensed into a short amount of time.
One of the things about sales is repetition. And so basically after a few weeks, you didn't even really need to think too much on a call, because you had heard everything and you had already gotten to the best versions of how to ask questions, and already knowing kind of intrinsically, is this a deal that's going to close or not? And when you're selling transactionally, it's super important to be able to be like disqualify in or out and move on really quickly. So yeah, it was like you got to like peak efficiency and performance really, really quickly, or you didn't.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Well, on that note, let's dive right in, because that sounds like a great place to start. So that's kind of a trend. You saw a bunch of things happen during that time, David, and we'll kick this question your way. What are you seeing right now that sales managers are doing, in an economic downturn? So from our side, we've seen AEs having to prospect. We've seen SDRs having to handle more accounts, having to send more emails, make more calls, and just kind of unrealistic numbers. What have you seen on your end?
Yeah, I think we're actually just getting back to a place of like what I consider like purity. Like we went on this stretch of 10 years of abundance, where as a sales manager, and at mostly every SaaS company, like things were just good. Like you could do a bunch of things and things would go well, but the question is, looking back, were they going well because things were going well in general, or were they going well because these were the right things? And so I'm actually really excited about kind of what sales managers are doing now, and what I'm starting to see kind of circle back into trend, which is a focus on training, hiring, a focus on really giving great feedback, and not just kind of like refreshing dashboards and asking people about deals. And so I think you're seeing this transition back into maybe not necessarily a player coach, but an in the weeds involvement and development of each individual rep, versus just kind of a focus on the number and asking people about random deals.
Going back in the weeds is almost what people don't want to do at times, but I feel like it's necessary to really truly learn the role and dive into it. Greg, what do you have to say on that side?
I think, David, we were talking about this in preparation. like the last couple of years have been super easy. Like you could kind of like fall into software sales and be successful. And you didn't really have to learn, I don't want to say the soft skills or kind of some of the, like, yes, you needed to learn the product, but you also needed to learn some things around time management, perseverance, how to disqualify. There's some things that just, if you kind of fell into software sales and were successful as a result of the, let's say the macroeconomic environment, maybe, or the vertical you were selling into, like you quickly have realized that, oh, maybe I wasn't that good. And I need to level myself up. And so I think there's some harsh realizations going on that people actually, you need to be a professional at this, right? Everybody wants to be a sales professional, but they don't want to do the work that a professional does. And this is where the professionals are starting to shine, and the people that aren't are not.
Yeah, it's certainly like a re-index on like the key sets of skills that you actually need to be successful in this role at all levels. And I don't know, I think as someone who's been in sales, kind of bounced around a little bit, but mostly grown up in sales, that's exciting to me because I think it's cool to see folks really aligning their careers around like the set of skills that you actually need to be successful. And you're right, it's not just like show up, answer the call, answer a few questions, and like send a payment link. It's like, no, it's all the things around time management. It's all the things around prospecting and cold calling that, yeah, like, I don't know, it kind of went out of style, but I think everyone should always be doing it. Like you should have inbound and outbound. It's kind of the healthy way to grow. Running a really good discovery, asking great questions, like understanding how to map an org, how do you close, how do you work through procurement and legal and all this sort of stuff. So I think you're going to end up in a year or two with like a huge leveling up of skill set and probably a weeding out of folks who maybe just don't want to do that. And that's okay too.
Yep.
Do you think, I mean, to build that set of skills, is it just being in the weeds and doing it? Or is there other things that can help people like be better at time management or cold calling, prospecting, or on discovery calls? Like, what do you think on that side, David?
So it's interesting. If you had asked me this like maybe 4 or 5 months ago, I might have a different answer and I might be skipping ahead a little bit, but I actually think with some of the things that are happening around like chat GPT, and like AI, although it's like incredibly buzzy and we don't quite yet know what it is, I actually think what we're doing is we're eliminating all of the things that are, I hate calling it busy work because it has to be done, but essentially automating all the cruft around a salesperson doing anything that isn't actually selling, and getting back to this like perfecting of skill. And I think for a sales manager, that should be exciting if you've been kind of focused on growing your people and coaching and giving good feedback, and you can really break down a discovery and you can get folks running the same process. Because I know for a fact most sales managers don't want to be like, hey, did you send that follow-up email? Or like, I noticed you didn't put your call notes in the CRM. That's just wasted time, energy, and focus. And so I think with all the things happening in and around AI across kind of go-to-market functions, you're kind of reducing the work that isn't the work, if you know what I mean. And so I'm really excited about that.
Yeah. On that note, so let's dive into that a little bit and talk about objection handling, because that's a big thing that comes up with sales managers in the coaching side, trying to give feedback to their reps, but maybe they have a team of 10 and there's no way to be able to manage that much time during the week to actually help your reps, plus one-on-ones, plus all the data management behind it. So, Greg, I'll kick this your way. What could sales managers be doing differently right now, maybe with tech or without tech, to help their team overcome objections?
Well, let's start with without tech first, because obviously we're biased. I think without tech, sales managers need to look beyond the status quo of how they've handled different objections in the past. I'm a huge avid reader of psychological principles of, I won't call it mind games, but like Inception, right? How do you use psychological tactics to help people overcome their own objections or answer their own questions? And so I think tech aside, now is an opportunity for sales managers to look outside of their standard battle card bubble of like, here's my talk tracks for this objection. Like, no, that stuff's not going to cut it anymore. Like, you need to take that next step, educate yourself, and then pass that down to your team. And so the way we think about handling objections needs to change. The way we prepare for different objections needs to change. The now's not a right time objection is very different today than it was a year ago. And so how you're going about handling that needs to change. And as a sales manager, it's your responsibility to make sure your team is armed with the tactics and strategy on how to handle that objection. With tech, obviously, David, you talked about AI and how to reduce the redundancy, the manual effort. Like, technology should be an accelerator of change in a good way. And so when you can take that talk track that you just learned and then instantly put it in front of your rep without ever having to role play, how much opportunity are we saving by just leveraging technology to deliver that, as opposed to role playing and coaching for 3 or 4 hours over the course of a couple of weeks. So, but the core foundation still is what that rep says. And that starts with like sales manager becoming proficient in new ways to overcome objections.
Yeah. David, you want to add anything on that?
Yeah, so I might just like put out a qualifier that's objections come in buckets for different types of places in the sales process. So like objections for cold calling, I'm not gonna go through because they've been the same forever. And so I think if you cracked the code or at least understand how to do that, you probably don't need it. I think to me, there's like a next level up from objections, which is like, is every rep prepared to have an actual business discussion with a prospect? And I think largely this concept of like business acumen, a lot of times because it's hard to kind of put your finger on and say like, yes, this person has that business acumen to have this good conversation or doesn't. And because it's a spectrum, folks really don't test for it in the hiring process. And because, for all the things we've talked about over the last like 5 to 10 years, it was like, okay, like you could probably just kind of know a little bit about your product and like just kind of walk someone through the standard script and you get your regular objections and the objections card and you could read that off. But I think you head off a lot of objections by having a real conversation with prospects. And the way you do that is by deeply understanding their role and their business. And so I think you're going to see this big rotation back to salespeople really being kind of stewards of business and best process and closer to a consultant around the problem. And I think when you do that, you eliminate just all of these normal objections that you would see because you're running a two-way process as opposed to like just a one-way sale. And so, I don't know. I've probably say this probably 5 more times while we're here. I'm just really excited to get back to some of the fundamentals of selling and what is like good, clean living for a salesperson to understand the product you're selling, deeply understand the persona and their pain, but just to be able to like look at a company and understand, how do I think this company is run? How do I think they generate leads? How do I think their structure is set up? What are the big problems I think they have? And before you get on this call, you're already thinking about and excited about learning about this person's business and helping them grow their business or do better in their job. And when you do that, like the objections are not as important to focus on because that conversation is just so much more impactful.
It's almost like the challenger sales approach where like you go in and you know more about what keeps that person up at night than they know about what keeps them up at night. And so again, it's you have to level up as a salesperson and understand your buyer persona is way more than you used to because it's you're fighting objections on multiple fronts that you might not have had to face in the past.
You'll also see, so I had this conversation actually with someone this morning. I think we lost a little bit of this question in sales hiring of, okay, cool, like this person like sold in the industry before, okay, that's okay. But can I envision this person selling to my buyer? Like how would my buyer react to being with this person? And you can have a really excellent salesperson that won't be able to sell effectively to a specific buyer persona. And so I think there's going to be a lot of folks just kind of thinking about that. I've always thought about this in sales hiring. I'm like, can I imagine them being on the phone? Like, how would our buyer persona react to this person, to their style, to the way they ask questions? And I think, like, you know, if you're selling sales software, that's pretty easy. Like, if you're a salesperson selling sales software to salespeople, that's one thing. But, you know, if you're selling to developers, like, probably that person that's selling sales software, like, doesn't necessarily have the style that's going to match. And again, before it was kind of like, they're just going to buy anyways. Like, we'll load them in. This person's hit quota a bunch of times. I think it's going to be even more important to match that persona to persona so that conversation is fruitful.
I love that you talked about that, because persongenics, like your dominant, expressive, analytical, amiable personality types. I could never sell to the developer. They will perceive me as an asshole or not a nice person 99% of the time. I know that. I also know that I'd probably never be hired to go sell a product that, you know, is selling into a developer or maybe a chief information security officer, because my brain simply doesn't understand risk in the way their brain does. And so you need to match that. So I love that you talked about that.
Yeah, I think for especially new sales managers, because I think there's going to be a lot of there's this mentality of how it was the last 5 years that maybe won't want to change, won't want to get in the weeds, won't want to relearn this. And so I think there's going to be a realm of new sales managers who can use this information for hiring their team, making sure, you know, that they're hitting, they're focusing on the right things on their one-on-ones to help them. So I think there's a lot of information here that we could probably spend another half hour on, but let's transition a little bit more to talk about tech, because we started to chime on that with ChatGPT and AI. I mean, David, how do you see, besides the automating and the tasks, how do you see tech playing a bigger role for sales managers and or reps in that way?
So I think there's two pieces. There's the what do I work on, and then there's the actual work. And so I think there's going to be a lot of things happening around the what do I do. And this is always the problem with a sales team, especially as you're scaling up and as a leader, you're like, is my salesperson actually doing the things and working on the things that I want them to be doing? Like, are we spending our time in the right places? And then is that time being spent doing good work and doing what we want? And so I think in the first bucket, I think there's going to be a lot around kind of signals and activity, especially in and around product-led growth. And there's a bunch of companies kind of like doing this sort of stuff. I just still think it's early days, but more point-and-click solutions for that. I think bigger companies like HubSpot, for example, like we basically engineered and built our own kind of signaling system so that we know the right time to reach out to someone and then what to say. I think that's going to be more commoditized with tech. I think this is going to be a lot easier. And then, yeah, as we've talked about, like basically anything from the point at which a salesperson begins their work with a prospect or a customer, just automation and cruft being removed. And like, I don't know, like, is ChatGPT the most amazing thing I've ever seen in the world? Like, it's like cool. It's really cool, right? But I can tell you, like, I've seen a lot of sales emails, and ChatGPT writes better sales emails than probably 90% of the salespeople out there, and it does it immediately, and it does it without thinking. And so I think part of me says, like, ooh, shouldn't the salesperson like learn how to send a good follow-up? But I think we're moving into a place where, like, hey, probably not. Like, we should just teach them to be the most effective in a really great discovery, a really great demonstration of value in a product, understanding of process and how someone buys, and then everything else should just move to a world of automation. And I don't know, that's like exciting to me because of the efficiency. It's like, oh, whoa, like what if I could open up 3 more hours a day for my sales team to sell? That seems like a great thing. And even if there's nothing for them to do in that time, I've always found it incredibly helpful to have time and space to think during the day, because that's where ideas come from. That's where iteration and innovation comes from. And you can't get to that point mentally if you're back to back all day and like you get to 5 o'clock and you're like, I got to send all these follow-up emails. Like, I can't even understand my notes. Like, what was this person versus that person? And it's better for the buyer as well, right? And so I think this is a two-way street where like the buyer benefits a ton here. And so, yeah, I think it's going to happen like everything slowly, then suddenly.
Yeah. So as we're evolving, and let's think about the sales manager position, and one, are they spending enough time actually evaluating their tech stack, or are they just using what they used to have? Like, what is going to change? I'll let you start on this, but in the next year or two, how will the sales manager role change or evolve from what it is today?
Well, so there's a couple different like laws around the rate of advancement of technology. Moore's law talked about kind of the doubling of computing power on a processing chip every 2 years. Nevin's law is talking about the rate of supercomputing and quantum computing. And so if we think about where ChatGPT is today, double the capabilities of that 2 years from now. Double the capabilities of that 4 years from now. Sales managers, in my opinion, they need to understand what's coming, because discovery calls, those become automated by software soon. We're not super far away from a world where emails are written by software, where conversations are had with software. And so sales managers need to embrace that and almost become like subject matter experts in how to deploy that technology, and then understand how it's actually impacting their business as opposed to fighting it, because it's coming. It's not going to stop. And so I think sales managers need to start to recognize that they should almost become, subject matter experts in how to use technology like that to benefit their business.
David, what do you think?
Yeah, I might take a different, like the machines are taking over approach that what Greg took. I think you're like probably generally correct in the ways things are happening, but I might just take a second to talk about skill set of sales managers. And so I actually think we're going to move into a world where sales managers, kind of frontline leaders, will begin to be able to own more of the process and operational cadence around their teams. And I think in order to do that, you need to be self-reliant, and you need to be able to essentially mine data and answer questions that you have. And so I think what you'll end up seeing is a lot more sales managers, and even like all the way up the chain sales leaders, who know SQL and like can query their database to answer questions, because I think speed and being autonomous is going to be synonymous with success. And so I think today most sales leadership is kind of reliant on, hey, can I build this report in Salesforce or HubSpot or wherever I'm at? That doesn't kind of get it. Okay, let me ask sales ops. So like, that's not the world as a leader you want to live in, where you're reliant on other teams or other humans. And so I think I'm starting to actually see a lot more sales leaders where when I talk to them, they're like, no, I don't use sales ops for most of my stuff. I know SQL, and I can query in Looker, or I push everything into a sheet and I do it there. And I think that's going to start to set people apart when you can ask questions about your business and answer them, and then make decisions on your own really, really quickly.
For the record, I don't think the machines are taking over.
This was great, you guys. And I think there's a lot of good tidbits that sales managers can take from this, but it's their turn to go actually implement it. I think that's possibly the hardest part for a lot of people, is the implementation of these ideas and tips. So would you both be open? Could people connect with you? Where's the best place to reach out if they want to learn more? David, where should people connect with you?
I would love people to reach out. I love having conversations about anything go-to-market or product related. So yeah, LinkedIn is the best place to get me.
Okay. Greg, what about you?
Yeah, LinkedIn, or shoot me an email, greg@abstrakt.ai. That works.
Perfect. I'll put the links in the description below, but thank you both. I appreciate your time today.